I welcome you all to Acquiring Aquinas, where we break down an article from Aquinas' Summa Theologiae into its logical form to more easily understand it. We're looking at Part 1, Question 1, Article 1, whether besides philosophy any further doctrine is required. In this particular question and in this article, he's looking at basically the question about whether theology, sacred doctrine, should be considered to be knowledge or not. The topic, the inquiry, and the answer are given here as a kind of thumbnail sketch. So the topic, the general question being addressed, is the nature and extent of sacred doctrine. So what is sacred doctrine, and basically what is the range of the things that it can know? Then the article is identified through the question whether besides philosophy any further doctrine is required, whether there is a source of knowledge that is special, that's not already sort of covered by philosophy. And Aquinas' specific answer is some things known are known by divine revelation. So keep your mind on this particular answer, since it basically provides the overall structure for the article. All right, so first he begins with looking at some fairly plausible arguments that conclude in a contrary manner or in a contradictory manner to his answer that some things known are known through divine revelation. So let's take a look at this first objection argument. No philosophical science is known by divine revelation. That's the major premise. All things known are philosophical science, the minor premise, to the conclusion that thus no things known are known by divine revelation. And this is contradictory to the answer that Aquinas ultimately argues for. You see in the bottom left-hand corner of that argument that identifies it as a valid Aristotelian syllogism. So Aquinas is going to need to find which of these premises he is going to claim or argue is false. But the arguments he gives in favor of them, so what a sort of devil's advocate might do in arguing to a conclusion against Aquinas' conclusion, is the following. So with regard to the major premise that no philosophical science is known through divine revelation, he says that philosophical science only treats of things that are not above reason, and since divine revelation is above reason, then therefore no philosophical science can be known through revelation. So it's a way of demarcating, you might say, philosophical science from divine revelation. That philosophical science is very much methodologically distinct from divine revelation insofar as philosophical science sticks within what is called natural reason, or those things that can be known through natural reason, whereas divine revelation is sourced from that which is not natural reason or something above natural reason. The minor premise is all things known are philosophical science. And this is suggesting that all the known is encompassed by philosophical science. And so anything that is beyond philosophical science will, in the words of this quotation from Sirach, be too high for us and not something able to be properly known by us or scientifically known by us. Now, with regard to the second objection argument, it goes like this. No beings are known by divine revelation. All things known are beings. Thus no things known are known by divine revelation. The support for this major premise really has to do with the relationship between, you might call, the science of being and the philosophical sciences. The philosophical science that studies being is metaphysics, and it seems that there is nothing in the scope of metaphysics that cannot be known within metaphysics, and so therefore no beings would be known by divine revelation. In fact, Aristotle includes theology within philosophy itself. Now, with regards to the minor premise, all things known are beings, and this is the idea that there's a relationship between what is known and what exists. In other words, there are these convertible concepts of truth and existence, and they really are the same thing. So the scope of the things that are known will be beings. And then from these two premises, the conclusion follows. The no things known are known by divine revelation. He next gives what I call an orienting argument, or a basic argument that is grounded in some way, oftentimes grounded in, let's say, a tradition or a particular traditional source, which basically agrees with Aquinas' conclusion to the question. So the one that's given by Aquinas here is all scriptural truths are known by divine revelation. Some things known are scriptural truths, thus some things known are known by divine revelation. The argument in favor of the major premise is that Scripture is something that's inspired from God and so is not part of the philosophical science, which, as we've said earlier, is built up by human reason. Now, in terms of support for the minor premise, he gives the 2 Timothy 3:16 passage that all Scripture inspired of God is profitable to teach, to reprove, to correct, to instruct in justice. And so, from Scripture itself, it's making the claim itself that there is knowledge given through Scripture. And so the conclusion follows, that some things known are known by divine revelation. Now Aquinas gives his argument, what I call the best argument for the answer. And it goes like this. Some ends of human beings are known by divine revelation. All ends of human beings are things known, and then the conclusion, some things known are known by divine revelation. The argument he gives for the major premise goes like this, that since human beings are themselves directed to God as their last end, and that this end specifically surpasses the grasp of human reason, it was therefore then necessary for the salvation of human beings that certain truths which exceed human reason should be made known to them through divine revelation. So there's a higher calling that human beings have than what can be understood through natural reason. So that necessitates there being some divine revelation being made available to human beings so that they know the direction. Now there's also some, what we call it, natural reason with respect to God and the truths about God that can be had, as Aristotle shows us, through philosophy. But even those truths that can be known naturally are often reserved for really those who have the leisure, the time, and the mental capacity to really reflect on these things. The idea of the nature of God and that knowledge of God which is related to human beings' fulfillment, really God wanted to make available to more than just the philosophers. With regard to the minor premise that all ends of human beings are things known, there's a necessity here in terms of understanding human action and human volition and the kind of autonomy of human beings, that our ends are things that are known by us. We think because we want to be happy, for example, that's our end, and knowledge of that end, we therefore can act in an appropriate way to achieve that end. And so then the conclusion follows, that some things known are known by divine revelation. Aquinas goes on the offensive against the particular objection arguments, objection argument 1 and 2, and he does this by pointing out which of the premises in those arguments are in fact false. Now, with respect to the first objection argument, it's the minor premise that Aquinas argues is false. So the minor premise of the first argument is all known things are truths of philosophical science. And Aquinas thinks that some things known are not truths of philosophical science. And so the argument for this is that Aquinas actually identifies a kind of knowledge that divine revelation beliefs have. In other words, they are given for belief by God and then known through faith. And so this faith would be something that is known that's not within philosophical science. With regard to the second objection argument, he argues against the major premise. The major premise being that no beings are known by divine revelation. He argues that some beings are known by divine revelation. Now, someone might think that no beings are known by divine revelation precisely because the full scope of the things that are knowable by us are already covered, let's say in metaphysics or the philosophical sciences. But Aquinas points out here that there can be different sources of the same things that are known. So just like he says the astronomer and physicist may both come to the same conclusion, for example, that the Earth is round. Just because the astronomer comes to these conclusions and it's successfully studied within astronomy doesn't mean that a physicist also can't come to the same conclusion. And so Aquinas points out here that there are some beliefs, one and the same beliefs, that can be known through philosophical science, but also through divine revelation. So the same things can be known both philosophically and theologically. And so some things or beings can be known through divine revelation.